They thought I was a uniformed office rat stamping receipts while they flew first class to paradise. They raised champagne at a six-star resort, laughing at my absence, unaware that the only reason their plane was not shot out of the night sky was because I was on the other end holding my finger on the kill switch. When the big screen in the banquet hall lit up, they saw the naked truth hidden for 12 years. My name is Lorelei Bracken. For 32 years, I have carried that name like a heavy rucksack on a forced march, feeling the straps dig into my shoulders, waiting for the moment I could set it down. In the high-altitude world of New York finance, the name Bracken meant steel. It meant shipping fleets that crisscrossed the Pacific. It meant a level of wealth that insulated you from the friction of everyday life. But tonight, standing outside the double mahogany doors of the Obsidian Room at the top of the Pierre Hotel, I knew that to the people inside, the name Lorelei meant only one thing: disappointment. I checked my watch. I was 11 minutes late. In the civilian world, 11 minutes is a rounding error. It is a traffic jam. It is a slow elevator. In my world, 11 minutes is a lifetime. 11 minutes is the difference between a satellite maintaining its geosynchronous orbit and a hunk of burning titanium raining down on a suburb in Chicago. I took a breath, holding it for a count of 4, then exhaling for a count of 4. The tactical breathing did little to settle the acid in my stomach. I looked down at my sleeve. The stain was still there. It was a small, dark smudge of hydraulic fluid, acquired when the transport vehicle I had taken from the secure facility had blown a seal 3 blocks from the subway station. I had tried to scrub it out with a damp paper towel in the hotel lobby bathroom, but the oil had set into the polyester wool blend of my Class A uniform like a permanent mark of shame. Against the pristine Air Force blue fabric, it looked less like a stain and more like a target. I smoothed the tunic, adjusted the hang of my service jacket, and pushed the doors open. The wall of sound hit me first, the clinking of heavy silver against fine china, the low murmur of expensive conversation, the sudden, sharp burst of laughter that sounded like glass breaking. The air in the room smelled of truffle oil, aged cognac, and judgment. My father, Arthur Bracken, sat at the head of the long rectangular table. He was holding court, his hand wrapped around a crystal tumbler of scotch. His face flushed with the kind of expansive, aggressive happiness that only came when he was celebrating a victory over a competitor. Tonight was about Julian, my brother, the golden boy. Julian sat to Arthur's right, looking like he had been poured into his tuxedo. He was 35 years old, handsome in a way that suggested he had never been told no in his entire life. He was laughing at something the man next to him had said, his head thrown back, exposing the long, smooth line of his throat. I stepped into the light of the chandeliers. "Ah," Arthur said. He didn't stand. He didn't smile. He just stopped talking, and the silence rippled down the table like a command. "Lorelei, you decided to join us." He looked at his watch, a gold Patek Philippe that cost more than my first car. "We were beginning to think you had gotten lost on the subway." "I apologize," I said. My voice sounded flat in my own ears, stripped of the command resonance I used in the control room. Here, I wasn't Major Bracken. I was just Lori. There was an issue with transport. "Transport," Julian repeated, swiveling in his chair to look at me. His eyes dropped instantly to the stain on my cuff. He didn't say anything about it, but his lip curled just a fraction of an inch, a micro-expression of pure disgust. "Did you take a garbage truck, Lori?" A few of the guests chuckled. I recognized them. Board members, investors, the CEO of Kincaid Logistics, the company Julian had just acquired, men and women who measured worth in stock options and summer homes. "I came from the base," I said, moving to the empty chair at the far end of the table. It was the seat closest to the kitchen door, the exile seat. Traffic was heavy. "Well, sit down, Arthur said, waving his hand dismissively. "Do not let your appearance ruin the aesthetic of the evening any longer." I sat. The chair was velvet, soft and yielding, a stark contrast to the ergonomic, rigid mesh of the command chair I had spent the last 14 hours in. I placed my service cap on my lap, positioning it carefully to cover the oil stain on my sleeve. "We were just telling Mr. Kincaid about your role," Arthur said, turning back to the silver-haired man on his left. He gestured vaguely in my direction, a motion that encompassed my uniform, my rank, and my entire existence. "Lorelei is in the Air Force." "I see that." "Mr. Kincaid said politely, "an officer." "She does clerical work," Arthur said quickly. The lie came out smooth as oil. "Administrative support. You know how the military is. Mountains of paperwork, red tape. They need people to file the forms, stamp the approvals. Lorelei is very good at following instructions, keeping the files in order for the men who run the operations." I felt my jaw tighten, my molars ground together. Clerical work. 12 hours ago, I had been coordinating the orbital realignment of a KH-11 reconnaissance satellite while simultaneously tracking a rogue signature that looked suspiciously like a kinetic kill vehicle testing its thrusters over the Pacific. I commanded the National Orbital Command, the NOC. I held the clearance codes that could black out the entire eastern seaboard or pinpoint a terrorist cell's phone signal from 300 miles up. But to Arthur Bracken, I was a secretary in camouflage. "That sounds steady," Mr. Kincaid said, clearly losing interest. "Very safe." Safe is Lorelei's middle name. My mother, Evelyn, chimed in. She was sitting opposite Arthur, drinking white wine with a frantic sort of dedication. She smiled at me, her eyes tight at the corners. She always preferred the background. Some people are leaders, and some people are support. It takes all kinds to make a world, doesn't it? "Speaking of the world," Julian interrupted, tapping his fork against his glass. The sound cut through the tension. "We have an announcement. A little reward for the merger." He grinned, looking around the table. "Mom, do you want to tell them? Or should I?" "Oh, you tell them, darling," Evelyn said, beaming. "We are going to the Aurora Pinnacle," Julian announced. A hush fell over the table. Even the wealthy are impressed by the impossible. The Aurora Pinnacle was a myth made concrete. A resort in Aspen accessible only by private helicopter, where the rooms were carved into the granite of the mountain and the glass walls looked out over 100 miles of untouched snow. $50,000 a night, Julian said, dropping the number casually, letting it hang there to be admired. We booked the entire top tier, private chefs, private instructors, total isolation, no cell service, no internet, just us and the snow and the best Scotch money can buy. He looked at me. "We leave tomorrow morning at 8. Dad chartered the Gulfstream. Try to pack something that isn't olive drab. Okay, Lori." I stared at the white tablecloth. I looked at the condensation beating on my water glass. I felt the vibration of the phone in my pocket, the secure device that never left my side. It had buzzed twice in the last 3 minutes, a specific pattern. "Status check, immediate." "I can't go," I said. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of awe. It was the silence of a predator spotting movement. Arthur slowly lowered his glass. "Excuse me." "I can't go," I repeated, lifting my head to look him in the eye. "I appreciate the offer, but I cannot leave the city tomorrow." "Don't be ridiculous," Evelyn said, her laugh nervous and high-pitched. "It is already paid for. Lorelei, your father spent a fortune. You can take a few days off from filing." "I am not filing," I said. "My unit is on red flag alert. All leave is canceled. Essential personnel only. I have to report back to the command center in 4 hours." Julian snorted. It was a wet, ugly sound. "Red flag alert?" He mocked the term, making his voice drop an octave. "Oh no. What happened? Did the general run out of staples? Did the photocopier jam?" The table erupted in laughter. It was a release of tension, and I was the target. "Maybe they ran out of coffee in the break room," Julian continued, encouraged by the audience. "Code red. The decaf is gone. Mobilize the secretaries. We need a caffeine drop immediately." My face felt hot, but my blood was cold. "It is not a joke, Julian," I said quietly. "It sounds like a joke," Arthur said. His voice cut through the laughter like a knife. The room went quiet instantly. He wasn't smiling. You are doing this on purpose. I am not. You are, he snapped. You cannot stand it. You cannot stand that your brother just closed the deal of the decade. You cannot stand that we are happy. So you invent this drama, this red flag alert. You wrap yourself in that uniform and pretend you are important so you can ruin the moment. I am a major in the United States Air Force, I said, my voice rising just slightly. I command a division at the NOC. We track orbital threats. This isn't a game. Dad, there is a situation developing that requires— National Orbital Command, Arthur interrupted, rolling his eyes. It sounds like something from a comic book. Listen to yourself. You sound delusional. He leaned forward, his face twisting with contempt. You are a servant. Lorelei, you work for the government. You push paper. You facilitate. You are not a warrior. You are not a hero. You are just support. And you use that job as a shield because you are terrified of the real world. You are terrified of competing with Julian and failing. That is not true, I said. I felt the vibration in my pocket again. 3 buzzes. Escalation. It is true, Arthur said. I see it every time you walk in here looking like that. Disheveled. Dirty. He gestured at the stain on my cuff. Look at you. You can't even keep your clothes clean for a dinner party. And you expect me to believe you are saving the world. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a money clip. It was gold, engraved with his initials. He pulled out a thick wad of bills. Hundreds. Crisp, blue-faced hundreds. He threw them on the table. They didn't land in a neat stack. They fluttered, scattering across the centerpiece, landing in the butter dish, sliding near my water glass. There, Arthur said. If you are so desperate to be a martyr, fine, stay here. But don't say I never gave you anything. There is what, $5,000 6 take it. I stared at the money. Benjamin Franklin stared back at me from the butter dish. Take it, Arthur sneered. Go buy yourself a new uniform. Or go to a bar and buy a round of drinks for your little soldier friends and tell them how mean your daddy is. Whatever you do, just do it away from us. I am tired of looking at you and seeing my own wasted investment. The room was deadly silent. The guests were looking down at their plates, embarrassed not for me, but for the awkwardness of the scene. Evelyn was drinking her wine as if it were water. Julian was watching me with a smug satisfaction, waiting for me to cry. I didn't cry. I had stopped crying over Arthur Bracken when I was 16 years old. I stood up. I picked up the linen napkin from my lap and folded it neatly, placing it on the table next to the scattered bills. I picked up my service cap. I brushed a piece of lint from the brim. I do not want your money, I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice I used to give firing coordinates. And I do not want your vacation. I looked at Julian. Watch your back on the slopes, I said. Avalanches happen when you least expect them. I looked at Evelyn. Goodbye, Mother. She didn't look up. Finally, I looked at Arthur. He was glaring at me, challenging me to make a scene, to prove him right that I was just an emotional child. I put my cap on my head, pulling the brim down until it was perfectly level. I squared my shoulders. Enjoy the pinnacle, I said. I hope the isolation is everything you want it to be. I turned and walked away. I didn't rush. I marched. My heels clicked against the marble floor with a rhythmic, military precision. Left, right, left, right. As I reached the heavy double doors, I paused. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could feel the relief flooding the room that the stain was removing itself. Safe travels, I whispered to the empty hallway as the doors swung shut behind me. They didn't hear me. Inside, Julian laughed, a sharp bark of sound, and I heard the clink of glass on glass. They were toasting their freedom. I walked to the elevator and pressed the down button. I checked my phone. The screen was red. Threat level critical. Intercept confirmed. Report to Glass Cage immediately. They were heading to a luxury resort to drink champagne and pretend they were gods. I was heading underground to make sure they didn't burn. Arthur was right about one thing. I was a servant. but he had no idea who I was serving, or what the cost of that service was about to be. I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close, cutting off the penthouse from the rest of the world. "Going down," I said to the empty car. "All the way down." My 2014 sedan rattled as I hit a pothole on the unmarked service road in New Jersey. The heater was broken, blowing lukewarm air that smelled faintly of burning dust. But I did not zip up my jacket. I needed the cold. I needed the sharp bite of the winter air to scrub the scent of truffle oil and expensive cologne from my senses. The obsidian room was 20 miles behind me, but the humiliation still clung to my skin like a film. Support, clerical work, a secretary in camouflage. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. If my father only knew, if he knew that the hands he mocked for being soft had authorized drone strikes in Yemen and cyber blackouts in North Korea. He might have been afraid to turn his back on me, but he did not know, and tonight, keeping him in the dark was the only way to keep him safe. I pulled up to a chain-link fence that looked abandoned. A rusted sign read, "Municipal Waste Management Site B." I rolled down my window and looked into the camera mounted on a bent pole. I did not speak. The lens zoomed in, scanning my retina, mapping the unique vascular pattern of my left eye. A red laser grid flashed across my face. The gate did not roll back. Instead, the ground beneath my car shuddered. A section of the asphalt, perfectly concealed, began to lower. I drove onto the hydraulic lift, and the world above disappeared as the pavement sealed shut over my head. I descended 60 feet into the earth. When the lift stopped, I stepped out into a sterile white corridor. The air here was recycled, scrubbed, and kept at a constant 68 degrees. I walked past 2 armed guards who snapped to attention. They wore no insignia, no flags, only black tactical gear. "Ma'am," the one on the left said. He shifted his stance, a subtle sign of deference. I did not stop. I walked straight to the decontamination airlock, stripped off my ruined service jacket with the oil stain, and threw it into the incinerator chute. I would not need dress blues down here. I pulled on a black flight suit, zipped it to the neck, and stepped through the final blast door. The operations floor of the National Orbital Command was a cavern of shadows and blue light. Rows of consoles formed concentric circles around a massive holographic globe suspended in the center of the room. Dozens of operators sat bathed in the glow of their screens, their fingers flying across keyboards in a silence so profound it felt heavy. "Officer on deck," someone barked. "As you were," I said, my voice cutting through the room. A young captain, Mercer, approached me. He held a tablet with trembling hands. "Welcome back, Major. We were worried you would get stuck in the gala traffic." "The gala is over, Mercer," I said, taking the tablet. "Give me the sitrep." Mercer fell into step beside me as we walked toward the center of the room. "Hostiles have escalated. We have identified the signature. It is not a state actor. It is the Obsidian Collective, high-tech anarchists. They have breached the firewall of the Aegis Ashore missile defense system on the East Coast." I stopped walking. "The Aegis system. That is impossible. The encryption keys rotate every 10 seconds. "They did not crack the keys," Mercer said grimly. "They spoofed the sensors. The system thinks there are incoming ICBMs. It is spinning up the interceptors, but there are no missiles. Major, there are only civilian airliners." I looked up at the holographic globe. The eastern seaboard of the United States was lit up with red vectors. Dozens of commercial flights Delta, United, American were tracking along their usual corridors, but on the defense grid, they were tagged as hostile warheads. If the automated defense system engaged, it would launch interceptor missiles. It would blow Flight 304 out of the sky over Philadelphia. It would turn Flight 911 into a fireball over Boston. Thousands of people would die in seconds. "What is the timeline?" I asked. 12 minutes to intercept," Mercer said. "We have locked out the manual override at the battery sites. The malware has isolated the launch commanders. They are blind. They think they are under nuclear attack. They will fire unless we kill the brain." I handed the tablet back to him. Prepare the glass cage. A ripple of tension went through the room. The operators looked up from their screens. They knew what that meant. Major, Mercer whispered, you have been awake for 30 hours. The neural load of the cage. Do it, I said. I walked to the far wall, where a single glass pod stood isolated on a raised platform. It was soundproof, shielded against electromagnetic pulses, and equipped with a direct neural interface. It was my cockpit. It was my coffin. They called me the silencer down here, not because I was quiet, but because when I entered the cage, the noise of the world stopped. I silenced threats. I silenced panic. I silenced the screaming chaos of the digital battlefield. I stepped inside, and the heavy glass door hissed shut, sealing me in a vacuum of silence. I sat in the reclining chair and pulled the interface helmet over my head. The world dissolved. Code. It was not ones and zeros. It was a landscape, a rushing river of data. I saw the logic gates of the Aegis system as massive, turning gears. I saw the malware as a black, corrosive slime coating the machinery, rewriting the definitions of friend and foe. I did not type. I thought. The interface translated my neural impulses into command lines. I dove into the stream, hacking away at the black slime with mental machetes. I rerouted power. I built virtual walls. I forced the system to handshake with the transponders of the civilian planes, screaming at the logic centers that these were people, not bombs. Target lock confirmed, the system voice whispered in my ear. Firing solution generated for track Alpha 19. Abort, I commanded, pushing the code with my mind. Invalid target. Override denied. Authorizing launch in 3 minutes. My heart hammered against my ribs. The terrorists had written a polymorphic loop. Every time I cut a line of code, it grew 2 more. It was learning. I needed to be faster. I closed my eyes in the physical world and opened them wider in the digital one. I stopped trying to block the signal. Instead, I changed the sky. I rewrote the atmospheric data the sensors were reading. I told the system that the air density at 30,000 feet was absolute zero. I told it that gravity had inverted. I fed it impossible data until the logic processors choked. System error, the voice said. Targeting reset, recalibrating. I had bought us time, maybe 4 minutes. I pulled the helmet off, gasping for air. Sweat ran down my neck, soaking the collar of my flight suit. My hands were shaking. Major. Mercer's voice came through the intercom. We have a pause. The batteries are standing down for recalibration, but the malware is adapting. I know, I said, wiping my forehead. I need 3 minutes. My neurotransmitters are fried. If I go back in now, I will stroke out. Copy that. 3 minutes. I sat back in the chair, staring at the blank glass wall. The silence of the cage was usually comforting, but tonight it felt suffocating. I needed an anchor, something to remind me why I was doing this. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was a breach of protocol, but I was the commander. I made the protocols. I opened Instagram. The first image on my feed was Julian. He was standing on a balcony at the Aurora Pinnacle. The snow-capped mountains behind him were breathtaking, bathed in the soft light of sunset. He was holding a glass of amber liquid, his other arm draped around a blonde woman I did not recognize. The caption read, Top of the world with the family. 5 stars feels like 0 gravity. Too bad some of us are stuck in the basement filing paperwork. Miss you. Lori. Hashtag paper pusher. Hashtag sorry not sorry. Hashtag Bracken Empire. I stared at the screen. Stuck in the basement. He had no idea. He was standing on a mountain in Aspen, breathing crisp, clean air, while I was buried 60 feet underground, smelling recycled ozone and fear. He was drinking 50-year-old scotch while I was swallowing bile. And yet, if I failed in the next 10 minutes, the satellite uplink that allowed him to post that photo would be used to guide a missile into a Boeing 747. I looked at the comments. Arthur Bracken. Success is for those who show up. Cheers, son. Rachel _ From _accounting, LOL, poor Lori. I let out a short, dry laugh. It sounded like a cough. I touched the screen, tracing the face of my brother. I did not hate him. I pitied him. He thought power was money. He thought power was a view. He did not know that power was sitting in a glass box, deciding who lived and who died, with no one to thank you for it. A knock on the glass made me jump. It was Mercer. He looked concerned. He pressed the intercom button. "Major, you okay?" You looked away. I slid the phone into my pocket. "I am fine, Mercer." "Is that the family?" he asked. He nodded toward where the phone had been. "I heard it was your brother's big night. You must miss them." I looked at Mercer. He was 24. He had a wife and a 6-month-old baby in Queens. If I failed, the debris field from the first intercept could rain down on his neighborhood. "They are in Europe," I lied. The words tasted like ash. "Business trip. They are probably asleep." "Ah," Mercer said. "Well, we need you back in the fight. The malware just bypassed the gravity simulation. The batteries are coming back online. 2 minutes to launch." I put the helmet back on. "Let's end this." I dove back into the data stream. This time, I did not use finesse. I used brute force. I found the central node of the terrorist code, the beating heart of the virus, and I grabbed it with my mind. It fought back. I felt a spike of pain in my temples, a blinding, white-hot needle of feedback. They were trying to fry my neural cortex. I gritted my teeth and held on. I rewrote the friend or foe identification tables manually, line by line, racing against the countdown. "Launch in 10, 9. I typed faster than thought. 8, 7. I located the back door they had used. 6, 5. I slammed it shut and welded the digital hinges. 4, 3. I executed the command, "All targets designate friendly." 2, 1. Silence. "Status," I yelled, ripping the helmet off. Through the glass, I saw the operations floor erupt, not in cheers, but in a collective exhale. On the holographic globe, the red vectors turned green. The interceptor missiles stayed in their silos. The planes continued their slow, steady crawl across the map. I slumped back in the chair. My nose was bleeding. A single drop of bright red blood landed on the white armrest. The intercom buzzed. It was not Mercer. It was the red line, the direct secure channel from the White House. I straightened up, wiping the blood from my lip with the back of my hand. "Bracken." "Major Bracken," a voice said. It was deep, gravelly. I recognized it instantly. It was the Chief of Staff. "The President is on the line." "Go ahead, sir," I said. "Major," the President's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of the nuclear codes. "We monitored the intercept. That was too close. The press is already sniffing around the flight delays. The FAA is asking questions we cannot answer without declassifying the NOC." "We held the line, Mr. President," I said. "For now," he replied. "But intelligence suggests this was just a probe, a test run. The Obsidian Collective is planning something bigger, and they know who you are, Major. They tracked your counter-hack." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "We are elevating the threat level to midnight," the President continued. "If they strike again, we will not be able to hide it. We are preparing a contingency for public disclosure. If the grid goes down, the world will know why, and they will know who is fighting for them." "Sir," I said, my voice steady, "my identity is classified. My family, they do not know." "If this goes where we think it is going, Major," the President said, "anonymity will be the least of your problems. Get your team ready. The next wave is not coming in days. It is coming in hours." The line went dead. I looked through the glass wall at the map. The green lights were comforting, but fragile. Above ground, my father was probably ordering another bottle of wine, complaining about the slow Wi-Fi. Below ground, I was preparing for war. I stood up and opened the door of the cage. Mercer was waiting with a towel and a bottle of water. "We did it," he said, smiling weakly. "Not yet," I said, taking the water. I looked at the digital clock on the wall. It was 3 in the morning. Clear the cache, reset the encryption, and Mercer. Yes, Major. Get me a sat link to the Aspen region, I said. I want to know exactly where the cell towers are near the Aurora Pinnacle. Mercer looked confused, but he nodded. On it. Do you think they are a target? Tonight, I said. Everything is a target. I walked back toward the console, the oil stain on my soul replaced by the blood on my lip. The broadcast was coming. I could feel it in the static in the air. And when it started, there would be no channel to switch to, no volume to mute. My family wanted a show. They were about to get a front row seat to the end of the world. The Aurora Pinnacle does not sell rooms. It sells altitude. It sells the intoxicating idea that if you simply pay enough money, specifically $50,000 a night, you can rise above the mundane problems of the species. Problems like gravity, like hunger, like the truth. From my station in the glass cage, buried 60 feet beneath the crust of New Jersey, I watched them. It was a violation of privacy laws that would have stripped me of my rank and sent me to Leavenworth for 20 years. I did not care. When the threat level hit midnight, the Constitution became a flexible document in the hands of the person holding the shield. I had tapped into the resort's internal security network. I told myself it was for their protection, to monitor the cell tower proximity for the Obsidian Collective's signal. That was a lie. I watched because I needed to see the ghost of the life I had rejected. On the main monitor, the feed from the Pinnacle's Great Hall was crystal clear. The room was a cathedral of glass and timber, suspended over a precipice of white granite. The fireplace was large enough to roast a car. My family sat in a semicircle of plush leather chairs, their skin glowing from the gold leaf facial treatments they had indulged in earlier that afternoon. They were drinking a vintage Cabernet from 1945. I knew the bottle. It cost more than a staff sergeant makes in a year. The air is just different up here, Arthur Bracken said, swirling the dark red liquid in his glass. He looked relaxed. The tension of the city shed like a snake skin. You can breathe, no smog, no noise, no desperate people. It is divine. My mother, Evelyn, agreed. She was wearing a cashmere wrap that looked soft enough to melt. I just wish Lorelei could have made it, although, with her salary, she probably would have felt uncomfortable. Lori is happier where she is, Arthur said, leaning toward the couple sitting on the adjacent sofa. I ran a facial recognition scan on them. The Graysons, venture capital, sharks in silk suits. She likes the structure, the smallness of it. You know how some people are just built for the back office that is Lorelei. She is a logistics assistant. She counts blankets and orders toner cartridges. My hand tightened on the console edge. The metal was cold. Is that so, mister? Grayson asked politely. I thought you said she was a major. Rank inflation, Arthur waved his hand dismissively. The military hands out titles like participation trophies these days to keep retention up. She is a glorified clerk. She does not have the head for strategy. She does not have the Bracken instinct for the big picture. If I put her in charge of a merger, she would panic over the font size on the contract. Julian laughed. He was already drunk, his eyes glassy and bright. We call her the Sergeant of Staplers. It is cute, really. She thinks she is saving the country, but she is mostly saving us from running out of paper clips. In the corner of the frame, a man sitting alone by the fire turned his head. I zoomed in. He was older, perhaps 70, with a posture that looked as if his spine had been replaced with a steel rod. He wore a simple wool sweater, but the way he held his book with alert, predatory stillness gave him away. General Marcus Halloway, retired U.S. Army, 3 stars, a legend in the Special Forces community, who had vanished into the private sector 5 years ago. He was listening. He looked at Arthur, then at Julian, and his eyes narrowed. It was a look of profound, silent assessment. He did not speak. He did not correct them. He just watched, his gaze shifting to the window where the snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets. He knew something was wrong with the atmosphere. Old war horses can smell ozone before the lightning strikes. I pulled my eyes away from the screen. I had been awake for 48 hours. My body was vibrating with a dangerous mixture of caffeine and adrenaline. My vision had a permanent grain to it, like a bad photograph. "Major," Mercer called out from the pit. His voice was tight. "We have a situation." "Define situation," I said, spinning my chair back to the operational displays. "Global air traffic control is reporting ghost echoes," Mercer said. "Not just on the East Coast anymore. It is worldwide. London, Tokyo, Dubai. The transponders are flickering. Pilots are reporting navigation errors of up to 3 degrees. 3 degrees at 500 miles an hour. 3 degrees is the difference between a runway and a mountain range." "They are widening the aperture," I muttered. "They are testing the global grid." "And Major," Mercer hesitated, "we have a specific threat vector. Flight 882, inbound to Aspen-Pitkin County Airport." I froze. Flight 882. That was the charter flight carrying Julian's entourage. His fraternity brothers, the hangers-on who leached off the Bracken fortune. They were coming to join the party. "Status of the bird?" I asked. "On approach," Mercer said. "But the instrument landing system at Aspen has just been compromised. The glide slope is reading false altitude. The tower is telling them they are at 12,000 feet. My telemetry says they are at 9,000. If they follow the tower guidance, they will fly directly into the side of Ajax Peak." I looked back at the surveillance feed. Julian was pulling his phone out. "Check this out," Julian announced to the room. He held the phone up, starting a live stream. I could see the interface on his screen. He was broadcasting to his 200,000 followers. "What is up, world?" Julian shouted, slurring his words. "Live from the pinnacle, just waiting for the boys to land. We are about to tear this mountain apart." He turned the camera to his face. "Shout out to my little sister Lori, back in the cubicle farm while you are filing tax returns. Big bro is living the dream. This is what success looks like. Sis, don't worry. I will bring you back a hotel soap or something. You are such a disappointment to the Bracken name, but we love you anyway." He laughed, a cruel, wet sound. "We have 2 minutes to impact," Mercer screamed. "Flight 882 is descending. They are blind. Major, the pilots trust the instruments." I closed my eyes for 1 second. The image of Julian's laughing face burned against my eyelids. I could let it happen. I could let the physics of the world take its course. It would be a tragic accident, a mechanical failure. No one would know I could have stopped it. But that was not who I was. That was who Arthur thought I was. "Isolate the Aspen airspace," I ordered, my voice dropping into the command register. "I am taking manual control of the regional transponder array." "Major, that is a violation of FAA protocols," Mercer warned. "You will be court-martialed." "Do it," I roared. I grabbed the neural helmet and slammed it onto my head. The silence of the glass cage swallowed me. I visualized the mountains of Colorado. I saw the plane, a tiny spark of heat against the cold blue topographic map. It was descending too fast. The jagged teeth of the mountain were waiting. I reached out with my mind, bypassing the corrupted tower signals. I hacked directly into the plane's flight management computer. It was a brute force entry, like kicking down a digital door. "Pull up," I commanded. I rewrote the altitude data. I flooded the cockpit with proximity warnings. Terrain, pull up." I could see the pilots wrestling with the yokes. They were confused. The tower was saying they were safe. The plane was screaming they were dead. I built a virtual wall in the sky. I projected a massive no-fly zone directly in their path, forcing the autopilot to execute an emergency collision avoidance maneuver. On the radar screen, the green dot of Flight 882 jerked upward. It banked hard to the right, the engines screaming as they applied maximum thrust. They cleared the ridge of Ajax Peak by less than 200 feet. "Target safe," Mercer breathed. "They are diverting to Denver. They are safe." I ripped the helmet off, gasping for air. My head felt like it had been split open with an axe. On the surveillance monitor, Julian was still live streaming. "Where are the boys? They should be here. Probably stopped to pick up more models. Am I right?" He had no idea. that his best friends had just stared death in the face, and that the sister he was mocking had just reached out from the other side of the continent to push them back from the edge. Suddenly, Evelyn stood up. She put her wineglass down. Her hand was trembling. "Arthur," she said. Her voice was thin. "Arthur, I feel sick." "It is the altitude, Evie," Arthur said, not looking up from his phone. "Drink some water." "No," she said. She walked to the window. "It feels wrong. The air feels heavy, like before a thunderstorm, but it is snowing." "You are hysterical," Arthur said. "Sit down. You are embarrassing yourself in front of the Graysons." "I want to call Lorelei," Evelyn said. "Why?" Arthur snapped. "So she can bore us with details about her commute. Leave the girl alone." "I am calling her." My secure phone buzzed. Mom calling. I stared at it. I could not answer. If I answered, the background noise of the command center, the alarms, the shouting, the hum of the servers would give me away. Or worse, I would break. I would scream at them to run. And they had nowhere to run. I let it ring. Evelyn looked at her phone, her face crumpling. "She is not answering." "Probably asleep at her desk," Julian quipped. I grabbed the red handset on my console. "Connect me to the resort landline. Priority override. Room 101. "Connecting," Mercer said. On the screen, I saw the phone on the side table next to Arthur light up. It rang. A harsh, mechanical sound that cut through the jazz music playing in the room. Arthur ignored it. It rang again and again. "Arthur, answer it," Evelyn said. "Who calls the room phone?" "Probably the concierge asking if we want turn-down service," Arthur grumbled. He reached out and picked up the receiver. "What?" "Dad," I said. My voice was distorted by the encryption, but it was me. "Listen to me very carefully. You need to get everyone into the basement, the wine cellar. Now, stay away from the windows." Arthur frowned. He pulled the phone away from his ear and looked at it as if it were a piece of rotten fruit. "Lorelei, how did you get this number? We are on a private exchange." "There is no time," I said. "The grid is unstable. The protection systems are failing. You are in a high-risk zone. Get to the cellar." Arthur laughed. He actually laughed. "Oh, this is rich. This is your red flag, isn't it? You hacked the hotel phone to play a prank. You are trying to scare us because you are jealous." "Dad, I'm not joking," I pleaded. "Look outside. Look at the sky." "I am looking at a $50,000 view," Arthur said. "And I am looking at a family that is enjoying it without you. Stop being pathetic. Lorelei, it is over. You made your point." "Dad." "Goodbye. Lorelei, do not call again." He slammed the phone down. I sat there, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like a flatline. He had hung up on his salvation. "Major," Mercer said softly. "Look." I looked at the main screen. Above the resort, above the snow-capped peaks of Aspen, the sky was changing. It was not the aurora borealis. It was something else. Long, jagged tiers of violet light were ripping through the atmosphere, the ionization trails of high-altitude kinetic weapons engaging in the upper stratosphere. The war had started. The silent, invisible war I had been fighting for 12 years was finally bleeding into the visible spectrum. In the great hall, Arthur stood up. He raised his glass to the room. "To freedom," he toasted, his voice booming, "to the Bracken Empire, and to a week without interruptions." They clinked glasses. Crystal rang out like a bell. Outside the panoramic window behind them, a burning satellite, struck by an interceptor I had launched 3 hours ago, streaked across the sky like a falling star. It was a beautiful, terrifying slash of fire. "Oh, look," Evelyn said, pointing. "A shooting star. Make a wish. Julian." Julian closed his eyes and smiled. "I wish," he said, "that this night never ends." I watched them on the screen, the fire in the sky reflecting in their oblivious eyes. "Granting wish," I whispered to the empty air of the glass cage. "But you are not going to like the morning." I turned to Mercer. "Lock down the blast doors, isolate the external network, and put the broadcast feed on standby. If if the president gives the order. I want every screen in America to see what is happening. Even the resort, Mercer asked. Especially the resort, I said. The darkness under the ground felt heavier now. Above us, the party was just getting started, but here, in the silence, the clock had just struck midnight. The world did not end with a bang. It ended with a buffering icon. 1 minute, the global network was a humming, invisible nervous system connecting 8 billion people. The next, it was a corpse. The news broke simultaneously in every time zone. In Tokyo, giant screens overlooking Shibuya Crossing flashed red. In London, the stock exchange tickers froze, then dissolved into static. The chyrons on CNN and BBC stopped displaying stock prices and started displaying 3 words that no one in the modern era wants to see. Unprecedented security threat. Inside the National Orbital Command. The silence of the glass cage was gone. The blast doors were sealed, but I could feel the vibrations of the chaos outside. The main holographic globe was a mess of colliding vectors. The Obsidian Collective had stopped testing the doorknobs. They were now kicking down the house. "They are flooding the mid-band frequencies," Mercer shouted, his voice cracking. "We are losing telemetry on the western grid. San Francisco is dark. Seattle is dark. They are targeting the power infrastructure." "Reroute through the hardened fiber lines," I ordered, my fingers flying across my interface. "Bypass the civilian nodes. Keep the defense net up." "I can't," Mercer yelled back. "They are using our own satellites against us. They have hijacked the commercial constellations. Starlink, OneWeb, they are all screaming noise. It is jamming our uplinks." I looked at the map. A wall of digital noise was sweeping east across the continent, shutting down everything in its path. Hospitals, traffic lights, air traffic control, and it was heading for the missile silos in the Dakotas. If they blinded the silos, we would be defenseless. I had 1 card left to play. It was an ace, but playing it would likely end my career. "Bring up Project Sentinel," I said. The room went quiet. Even Mercer stopped typing. "Major." Colonel Vance, my commanding officer, stepped forward. He was a good man, tired and gray, but he knew the book. "Sentinel is a black-budget asset. It is a $4 billion stealth communications hub. It is the president's eyes in the dark. You cannot touch it." "I am not going to touch it, Colonel," I said, my voice cold. "I am going to burn it." "You will be court-martialed," Vance warned. "That is treason. If those silos go blind, there will not be a court left to try me," I snapped. "Mercer, target the Sentinel satellite. I want you to overload its reactor core. Turn it into a massive electromagnetic pulse generator. We are going to detonate it in low orbit directly over the interference wave." "It will fry the commercial satellites too," Mercer whispered. "No internet, no GPS, no cell service for half the country." "Better silence than death," I said. "Do it." Mercer hesitated. "That is a direct order." "Captain," I roared. Mercer keyed the sequence. 60 miles above the Earth, a machine worth more than the GDP of a small nation began to scream. I watched the telemetry as the reactor spiked. Temperature critical. Core containment failing. "Detonate," I whispered. On the screen, a white blossom of energy erupted over Wyoming. It was silent, invisible to the naked eye, but on the electromagnetic spectrum, it was a tsunami. It slammed into the wall of digital noise the terrorists were generating. The jamming signal shattered. The red vectors on the map vanished. But so did everything else. At the Aurora Pinnacle, the lights did not flicker, they died. The jazz music cut out mid-note. The digital fire in the hearth vanished, revealing a cold black screen. The Wi-Fi symbol on every phone in the Great Hall disappeared. I watched on the surveillance feed, which was now running on a hardened military backup line, the only signal getting in or out of the mountain. The guests froze. It was a tableau of pampered confusion. Arthur Bracken stood up, his face purple in the dim light of the emergency exit signs. "What is this?" he shouted. His voice echoed in the sudden silence. I am paying $50,000 a night. Where is the music? Why is my phone dead? A young manager in a sharp suit rushed over, sweating. Sir, please remain calm. We seem to be experiencing a regional power fluctuation. Fluctuation. Arthur slammed his hand onto the table. My son is trying to upload a video. Do you know how many people are waiting for his content? This is unacceptable. I want to speak to the owner. Get him on the phone. The phones are down, sir, the manager stammered. All of them. Landlines, cellular, satellite. We are cut off. Cut off, Arthur laughed. A harsh barking sound. Do not be absurd. This is America. We are not cut off. Fix it, or I will buy this hotel and fire you myself. He had no idea. He stood there in his Italian tuxedo, threatening a minimum wage employee, while 200 miles above his head, the debris of a $4 billion sacrifice was raining down through the atmosphere. In the NOC, the celebration was short-lived. Surge, a technician screamed. The EMP blast had cleared the jamming, but the feedback loop was racing back down our own hardlines. Isolate the servers, Vance yelled, lunging for the manual breaker on the main wall. He was too slow. A capacitor bank on the north wall exploded. A shower of sparks and jagged metal sprayed across the command deck. The concussive force knocked me out of my chair. Smoke filled the air, acrid and biting. Medic, someone screamed. I scrambled up, coughing. Report. Colonel Vance is down, Mercer yelled. He was kneeling beside the commander. Vance was conscious, but his face was bloody, a piece of casing embedded in his shoulder. He grabbed Mercer's arm, his eyes finding mine through the smoke. Bracken, Vance wheezed. You have the con. Take the con. He slumped back as the medics swarmed him. I stood up. My knees were shaking, but my mind snapped into a terrifying clarity. I looked around the room. The operators were stunned, looking at the blood on the floor, looking at the smoke. They were waiting for permission to panic. Eyes on me, I bellowed. My voice was not my own. It was iron. It was war. The room froze. Every face turned to me. Mercer, get the colonel to the infirmary, I ordered. Jenkins, reroute power from the auxiliary generators. Sato, get me a link to NORAD. We just blinded the enemy. Now we are going to break their legs. I am assuming command of the North American theater. Move. The room exploded into action. The panic vanished, replaced by purpose. I stepped over the debris and took the center seat, the commander's seat. It felt too big, but I filled it. Back at the resort, the veneer of civilization was cracking. General Marcus Halloway was still sitting by the fire, which was now dead. He held a small black device in his hand, an older model secure pager. It had vibrated once. Code black. Aegis fallen. Command shift to Phoenix. Phoenix, that was my call sign. Halloway stared at the device. He knew what it meant. He looked up across the room at Arthur Bracken, who was now demanding a refund from the concierge while using the flashlight on his iPhone to inspect a bottle of wine. Halloway's face twisted. It was a look of profound pity mixed with absolute contempt. He stood up, pocketing the device, and walked over to the window. He looked out at the snow, his posture rigid. He knew that somewhere, a commander had just sacrificed a career to keep that snow white instead of radioactive ash. He looked back at Arthur, shaking his head slowly. You fool. His eyes seemed to say, You loud, empty fool, empty. In the corner, Julian was frantic. He was holding his phone up, trying to find a signal. Come on, he whined. I have 0 bars. 0. This is a disaster. He switched to camera mode, recording a video to upload later. Okay, guys. Update. The Pinnacle has gone dark. Like, literally. No power. No heat. The staff is useless. My dad is ripping them a new one. Which is hilarious. We are basically refugees in tuxedos. Send help, or at least send champagne. He turned the camera to a woman crying near the bar. Look at this. Drama queen. It is just a blackout. Babe, chill. A man standing nearby, a father holding a terrified child, stepped forward and shoved Julian. "Put that away," the man shouted. "Don't you get it? The emergency lights are red. This isn't a power outage. It is a lockdown." "Hey, watch the suit," Julian snapped, dusting off his lapel. "Do you know who I am? I am Julian Bracken. When the internet comes back, you are going to be canceled, buddy." "If the internet comes back," Holloway said. His voice was low, but it carried across the room. Julian turned. "Excuse me, Grandpa?" "You better pray the internet comes back, son," Holloway said, "because if it doesn't, that suit is just kindling." The temperature in the room was dropping. The advanced climate control of the Pinnacle had failed. The draft from the massive glass windows was creeping in, icy and relentless. The guests pulled their furs tighter. The smell of expensive perfume was being replaced by the smell of fear. In the bunker, I had stabilized the grid, but the Obsidian Collective was not done. They were regrouping for a physical strike. They were going to target the power stations directly. I needed to warn the population. I needed to warn her. I pulled up the emergency broadcast protocol. It was a one-way channel. It would override every functioning receiver in the country: television, radio, digital billboards. I typed a message. My fingers hovered over the send key. Mom. She was the only one who might listen. Arthur was too arrogant. Julian was too stupid. But Evelyn, underneath the layers of denial, she felt things. I sent a text through the override channel. It would push through even with the cell towers down. Piggybacking on the emergency frequency. "Turn on the National Emergency Channel. Do not leave the main building. This is not a drill." At the resort, Evelyn's phone lit up. It was the only light in the dark corner where she sat. She looked at it. Her hands trembled. "Arthur," she whispered. "Not now." "Evelyn." Arthur was arguing with the waiter about the temperature of the room. "I demand you bring portable heaters." "Arthur!" she screamed. The room went silent. Arthur turned, shocked. Evelyn never raised her voice. "Look," she said, holding up the phone. Arthur squinted at the screen. "National Emergency Channel." "What is that another trick from your daughter?" "She says do not leave the building," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. "Arthur, I am scared." Suddenly, the massive screen above the fireplace, which had been dead for 20 minutes, flickered to life. It wasn't the hotel logo. It wasn't a movie. It was a stark blue background with the seal of the President of the United States. A robotic voice synthesized from the emergency alert system boomed through the speakers, loud enough to rattle the glass. "The following is a message from the White House. Stand by for a presidential address." The room gasped. "See," Arthur said, though his voice wavered. "It is just politics, probably a budget crisis, or a weather warning." "Shut up," Holloway barked. "Sit down and shut up." Arthur opened his mouth to retort, but the screen changed. The seal faded. The president appeared. He was sitting in the Oval Office, but he looked different. He was not wearing a suit jacket. His tie was loosened. He looked tired, and behind him, through the window, the sky was a strange, bruised purple. "My fellow Americans," the president began, "tonight, our way of life was targeted." I sat in the command chair, watching the same feed on my monitor. I touched the microphone that would connect me to the president's earpiece. "We are live. Mr. President," I said. "The shield is holding, but you have to tell them the truth." "I know, Major," he said, though his lips on the screen moved a split second later. "I know." At the resort, Julian lowered his phone. Arthur sank into a chair. The cold air swirled around their ankles, but for the first time in his life, Arthur Bracken wasn't feeling the draft. He was feeling the weight of a world he didn't understand crashing down on top of him. And the woman holding the sky up was the one he had told to buy a new uniform. "Tonight," the president continued, "we are not being saved by luck. We are being saved by the sacrifice of a few." The camera zoomed in on the president's face. "And it is time you met them." The screen was the only source of light in the great hall. It was 40 feet wide, a monolith of pixels that dominated the room. 1 second, it was displaying the presidential seal. The next, it went black. Not the gray black of a turned-off television, the absolute, light-swallowing black of a void. In the silence that followed, a sound began to rise. It was low at first, like the hum of a massive generator spinning up. It grew louder, a digital crescendo that vibrated in the teeth of everyone in the room. Then, a single line of text appeared in sharp, white letters. Executive Order 11,994 Cyber Martial Law in effect. Beneath it, the logos of the White House and the Department of Defense faded in, rotating slowly. This was not a press conference. This was a command. The hundreds of guests, CEOs, heiresses, politicians sat frozen in their leather chairs. The air in the room was stale, the ventilation system having died an hour ago. The only movement was the flicker of the screen reflecting in their wide, terrified eyes. Arthur Bracken, however, was still moving. He was trying to signal a waiter who was currently staring at the screen with his mouth open. "This is ridiculous," Arthur muttered, loud enough for the people around him to hear. He adjusted his silk bow tie, his face flushed with irritation. "I pay $50,000 a night and I have to watch government propaganda. Where's the manager? I want this turned off. I want some jazz." "Dad, stop," Julian whispered. He was still holding his phone, tapping the screen uselessly. "Something is happening. Look at the logo. That is the DOD. "I don't care if it is the Pope," Arthur snapped. "I came here to relax, not to be lectured about. Whatever this is, it is probably a test, a drill to scare the masses." "Sir," General Holloway said from the darkness. His voice was like grinding stones. "If you say one more word, I will personally throw you through that window." Arthur opened his mouth to retort, but the screen changed again. The black dissolved into a live feed of the Oval Office, but the camera angle was wrong. It was close, intimate, shaking slightly. It wasn't a broadcast camera, it was a webcam. The president leaned forward. He looked exhausted. His eyes were red-rimmed. He wasn't looking at a teleprompter. He was looking directly into the lens. "Citizens of the United States," he said. His voice was raw. 3 hours ago, a hostile entity attempted to seize control of our nuclear arsenal. A gasp went through the room. It was a physical sound, like the air being sucked out of the space. "They failed," the president continued, "not because of our walls, not because of our treaties. They failed because of the men and women who stand on the wall while you sleep." He paused, taking a sip of water from a plain glass. "We have never shown you the faces of these guardians. Their safety requires anonymity. But tonight, the enemy knows who they are. The enemy has targeted them. And if we are to survive the next 12 hours, you must understand who is fighting for you. We owe our lives tonight to the National Orbital Command," the president said, "and specifically to the tactical brilliance of its on-site commander." The feed cut. It switched to a grainy, high-contrast black-and-white image. It was a security camera view. The timestamp in the corner was current. Live feed. Sector 7. The glass cage. The room on the screen was chaotic. Smoke hung in the air. Debris was scattered on the floor. People in flight suits were running back and forth, carrying tablets, shouting silent orders. But in the center of the frame, seated in a high-backed chair surrounded by floating holographic displays, was a woman. The camera zoomed in. The image sharpened. The woman was wearing a headset. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, messy bun, strands escaping to frame a face that was smudged with soot and blood. Her eyes were fixed on the data streams in front of her, moving with terrifying speed. She was speaking into the microphone, her hand chopping the air with precise, violent gestures of command. Arthur Bracken dropped his wineglass. It hit the floor and shattered, sending shards of crystal and red wine spraying across his polished dress shoes. He didn't notice. He was staring at the screen, his mouth hanging open in a rictus of shock. "That," Julian stammered. He pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "That looks like..." Lorelei, Evelyn breathed. Her hand went to her throat. That is Lorelei. Impossible, Arthur whispered. It is a trick, a deep fake. She is a secretary. She files papers. On the screen, the woman turned her head. She looked at someone off camera. Her profile was unmistakable. The sharp jawline, the intense, dark eyes. But the expression, it was an expression none of them had ever seen. It was the face of a wolf. A man in a general's uniform, 4 stars on his shoulder, stepped into the frame. He was limping, his arm in a sling. He walked up to the woman and handed her a thick red folder. He didn't just hand it to her. He saluted. He stood there, rigid, holding the salute for a full 3 seconds. The woman didn't stand. She took the folder, nodded once, and returned the salute with a crisp, practiced motion that spoke of years of discipline. The audio feed crackled to life. Target package confirmed. General. The woman's voice filled the great hall. It was Lorelei's voice, but it was an octave lower, stripped of any hesitation. It was a voice that commanded armies. Authorize the strike. Yes, Colonel, the 4-star general replied. Arthur flinched as if he had been slapped. Colonel, he whispered. She is giving orders to a general. Field promotion, Holloway said from the shadows. He had moved closer to the screen, his face illuminated by the glow. Listen to them. The commander is down. She has taken the con. She is running the whole show. On the screen, Lorelei opened the folder. She scanned the contents in seconds. She spun her chair back to the main console. Listen up, she barked. Her voice boomed through the resort speakers, distorted but powerful. We have one shot at this. If we miss, the East Coast goes dark for a decade. Sector 4, reroute the power. Sector 9, give me the kill chain. I want a firing solution on the Obsidian mainframe in 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Colonel? A chorus of voices shouted back in the background. Mom, Julian whimpered. He looked like a child. Mom, is that really Lori? Evelyn was weeping. Silent tears streamed down her face, ruining her makeup. She was nodding slowly. It is her. Look at her hands. She always taps her fingers like that when she is thinking. We used to yell at her for it. She is not filing papers, Arthur said. His voice was hollow. He sounded like a man who had just watched his house burn down and realized he was holding the matches. What is she doing? She is saving your ungrateful life, Holloway snarled. That is the war room. That is the tip of the spear. Your daughter isn't support. You idiot. She is the weapon. On the screen, Lorelei paused. She touched her earpiece. Mr. President, she said. The room at the resort went deathly silent. The grid is stabilized. We have a lock on the source, but the backlash will be severe. We are going to lose the commercial satellites. Do it, Colonel. The president's voice came over the feed. Copy, Lorelei said. She reached out. A red digital key appeared on her holographic display. She didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch. She turned the key. The screen in the resort flashed white for a second, then returned to the feed. Lorelei slumped back in her chair, exhaling a long breath. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, smearing blood across her cheek. She looked exhausted, aged 10 years in 10 seconds, but she was alive, and she was in control. Then she looked up. She looked directly into the security camera lens. It was as if she knew. It was as if she could see through the fiber optics, across the continent, right into the great hall of the Aurora Pinnacle. Her eyes locked onto the screen. They were cold. They were hard. They were the eyes of a stranger. Secure the room, she ordered, her eyes never leaving the lens. And cut the feed. The show is over. The screen went black. For a long moment, no one breathed. The silence in the great hall was heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of a paradigm shifting, of a world tilting on its axis. Arthur Bracken stood there, staring at the black void where his daughter's face had been. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. He looked down at the shattered wine glass at his feet. The red wine looked like blood on the expensive carpet. "She knew," Julian whispered. "She knew we were watching." "She made us watch," Evelyn sobbed. "She wanted us to see—" "See what?" Arthur rasped. "That she lied to us, that she played us for fools." "That she is better than us," Holloway said. He walked past Arthur, bumping his shoulder hard enough to make the older man stumble. "She didn't lie. Bracken, she protected you, from the truth, from the danger, and you mocked her for it." Holloway turned to the crowd of stunned millionaires. "You want to know who that was?" he shouted. "That was the woman who just ensured your money is still worth something tomorrow morning. That was Colonel Lorelei Bracken, and if any of you have a shred of decency, you will get on your knees and thank God she is on our side." Arthur looked around. He saw the looks on the faces of his peers, the Graysons, the investors, the people he tried so hard to impress. They weren't looking at him with respect anymore. They were looking at him with disgust. They were looking at the man who had called a war hero a secretary, the man who had thrown money at her like she was a beggar. Arthur sank back into his chair. He felt small, smaller than he had ever felt in his life. The $50,000 view outside was dark and cold, but the darkness inside him was colder. "Lorelei," he whispered. The name tasted strange in his mouth. It wasn't the name of his daughter anymore. It was the name of a stranger who held the world in her blood-stained hands. And he had sent her away with a request for a coffee maker. The lights in the hall flickered once, then died completely. The emergency generators had failed. The darkness was total. But in Arthur's mind, the image of Lorelei in that chair, surrounded by fire and command, burned brighter than the sun. The broadcast did not stop at the revelation of my face. That was only the opening salvo. What followed was a systematic deconstruction of my family's reality, broadcast in high definition to every screen on the planet. The feed on the massive monitor in the Great Hall cut to a different angle. It was a recording from 20 minutes prior, during the absolute peak of the crisis. The camera was tight on my face. My skin was pale under the harsh fluorescent lights of the NOC, and a streak of oil and blood marked my cheekbone like war paint. "Vector 19 confirmed." My voice rang out through the speakers of the Aurora Pinnacle. It was not the voice of the daughter who sat quietly at Thanksgiving dinners. It was a voice of absolute, terrifying authority. It was steady, rhythmic, and devoid of fear. "Reroute power from the Virginia grid. I need 100% output on the firewall. Burn the hardware if you have to." "Colonel," a voice off-screen shouted, panic edging into the tone. "The reactor is spiking. If we hold this lock, the radiation shielding might fail. We need to evacuate the command deck." On the screen, I didn't even blink. I kept typing, my eyes darting across invisible data streams. "Negative," my recorded voice said. "If we evacuate, the encryption key decays in 8 seconds. That gives the Obsidian Collective a window to detonate the warheads. We are not leaving." "But Colonel, the radiation—" "I said negative," I snapped, turning to face the subordinate. The ferocity in my eyes was enough to silence a room of hundreds. "We stay until the green light or until we melt. Those are the options. Get back to your station." The recording ended. In the Great Hall, the silence was absolute. You could hear the wind howling outside the glass walls, but inside, no one moved, no one breathed. Then, the news anchor's voice returned, grave and reverent. "That was Colonel Lorelei Bracken," the commentator said. "Defense analysts are now identifying her as the chief architect of the virtual Iron Dome. For the last decade, she has been the ghost in the machine, the primary designer of the cybersecurity protocols that protect every bank, every power plant, and every nuclear silo in the United States. Chief architect." The words hung in the air like smoke. Arthur Bracken sat frozen. His face had drained of all color, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under heat. He was gripping the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles were translucent. Around him, heads began to turn. It started slowly. A woman at the next table, the wife of a steel magnate, looked at the screen, then looked at Arthur. She whispered something to her husband. He looked too. Then the Graysons turned. Then the table of oil executives. The name Bracken was no longer just a corporate brand. It was the name of the woman who had just stared down the apocalypse while her father drank vintage wine and complained about the Wi-Fi. General Holloway stood up. He did not rush. He moved with the slow, deliberate weight of a tank turret traversing to acquire a target. He walked across the Persian rug, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. He stopped directly in front of Arthur's chair. Holloway looked down. He looked at the spilled wine on Arthur's shoes. He looked at the trembling hands. Then he pointed a callous finger at Arthur's face. "Arthur," Holloway said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. "I have a question." Arthur looked up, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. "General, Is that the secretary?" Holloway asked. He gestured to the frozen image of my face on the giant screen. "Is that the clerk you told us about, the one who is not smart enough for business, the one who counts paper clips?" Arthur opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping on a dock. "Because from where I am standing," Holloway continued, leaning in close, invading Arthur's personal space, "that woman just authorized a tactical EMP strike that saved my grandchildren in Chicago, while you were threatening a waiter over a bowl of soup." A murmur rippled through the crowd. It was the sound of judgment. The social currency Arthur had spent a lifetime accumulating was evaporating in seconds. "I didn't know," Arthur whispered. It was a pathetic, whiny sound. "She never told me. She lied." "She didn't lie." A woman's voice cut in from the crowd. It was Mrs. Grayson. She stood up, smoothing her dress. "She protected you, and you treated her like a servant." She turned to her husband. "Come on, Richard, the air in this corner is bad." The Graysons picked up their drinks and moved to the other side of the room. It was the signal. One by one, the other guests began to move. They stood up, picked up their purses and jackets, and walked away from the Bracken family. They formed a physical perimeter, leaving Arthur, Evelyn, and Julian isolated in the center of the room, surrounded by empty leather chairs. It was a quarantine. And then, the phones came back to life. The EMP effects were fading on the local level. The cellular network rebooted. A cacophony of pings, chimes, and buzzes erupted in the hall as hundreds of devices reconnected to the global stream. Julian looked down at his phone. He let out a strangled noise. "No," he squeaked. "No, no, no." He was staring at Twitter. He was staring at TikTok. Someone had screen recorded his live stream. The one where he called me the sergeant of staplers. The one where he mocked my service while holding a glass of scotch. It was viral, but not in the way he wanted. The hashtag #BrackenClown was trending #1 worldwide. Julian tapped the screen with shaking fingers, reading the comments. At Patriot Mom. "Imagine mocking the woman saving your life while you wear a tuxedo you didn't earn. This family is trash." At Tech Warrior. "Julian Bracken is the definition of dead weight. His sister is a hero. He is a parasite." At Vet Strong. "I served with people like Lorelei. We eat dirt so people like Julian can eat caviar. Disgusting." Julian looked up, his face pale. He saw a teenager at a nearby table holding up a phone, filming him. The teen was snickering. "Stop it," Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "Stop filming me, I didn't know. It is out of context." "It is exactly in context, son," Holloway said. "You put it out there, now you have to eat it." Julian slumped back, covering his face with his hands. The online adoration he craved had turned into a tsunami of hate. He was not the golden boy anymore. He was the national villain. On the main screen, the broadcast shifted again. The President of the United States appeared. He was standing at a podium now, flanked by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "Tonight," the President said, "we redefine the concept of service. We often look for heroes on the front lines, holding rifles. But tonight, the war was fought in the silence of the digital void, and the victory belongs to one officer. The screen split. On the left was the president. On the right was a live feed of me, sitting in the glass cage. I had wiped the blood from my face, but the exhaustion was etched into my bones. I was staring straight ahead, my expression unreadable. "Colonel Lorelei Bracken," the president said, "for your decisive action in the face of imminent catastrophic threat, and for your command of the North American defense grid during the blackout, I am hereby awarding you the Presidential Medal of Freedom with distinction." The room gasped. The Medal of Freedom. It was the highest honor a civilian or military officer could receive. It was the kind of thing you read about in history books. "This medal," the president continued, "is usually awarded in a ceremony at the White House, but given the circumstances, and the fact that Colonel Bracken is currently the only reason the White House still has power, we are dispensing with protocol." On the screen, General Vance, his arms still in a sling, stepped forward. He held a velvet box. He opened it, revealing the gold star and the blue ribbon. He did not pin it on me. I was wearing a flight suit, covered in soot. Instead, he placed the box on the console in front of me. He stepped back and saluted again. This time, every person in the NOC stood up. The operators, the technicians, the medics, they all stood and saluted. And in the great hall of the Aurora Pinnacle, General Holloway stood at attention. He snapped a crisp salute to the screen. Slowly, awkwardly, other guests began to stand. The steel magnate, the oil executive, the waiters, the busboys, even the young manager Arthur had threatened. They stood up in silence, honoring the woman on the screen. Arthur Bracken remained seated. He was too weak to stand. He was crushed under the weight of his own ego. But Evelyn stood up. She stood up slowly, her legs shaking. She looked at the screen, at the daughter she had dismissed for 30 years. She looked at the medal. She looked at the respect in the eyes of the general. And she began to cry. It wasn't a pretty cry. It was an ugly, guttural sound. It wasn't pride. Pride is bright and warm. This was shame. It was a cold, dark realization that she had been sleeping next to a monster. Her husband and ignoring a god, her daughter. "I didn't know," Evelyn sobbed, her hands covering her mouth. "I looked at her, but I didn't see her. Arthur, we didn't see her." "Sit down, Evelyn," Arthur hissed, grabbing her wrist. "You are making a scene." "No." Evelyn yanked her arm away. She looked down at him with sudden, terrified clarity. "She is saving the world, Arthur, and we sent her $5,000 to go away." On the screen, the president spoke one last time. "Colonel Bracken," he said, "the nation is listening. Is there anything you wish to say?" The camera zoomed in on my face. I looked tired. I looked old. But my eyes were clear. I looked into the lens. I knew they were watching. I knew Arthur was watching. I knew he was sitting in his expensive chair, surrounded by people who now despised him. I knew Julian was watching his reputation burn on Twitter. I knew Evelyn was crying. I leaned forward toward the microphone. "We do not do this for the applause," I said. My voice was quiet, intimate, as if I were speaking directly into their ears. "We do not do it for the title, and we certainly do not do it for the money." I paused. "We do it because someone has to stand at the door when the wolf comes," I said. "Even when the people inside the house are laughing at us for checking the locks." I held the gaze for a heartbeat longer. "Stay safe," I said. "The night is not over." I reached out and cut the feed. The screen went black. The lights in the great hall finally flickered and stabilized as the backup generators fully engaged, but the atmosphere had changed permanently. The guests stood there for a long moment, processing what they had just seen. Then, as if by collective agreement, they turned their backs on the center of the room. Arthur Bracken sat alone in the pool of light. He looked at his empty hands. He looked at the shattered glass. He looked at his son, who was weeping over a smartphone, and his wife, who was staring at him like he was a stranger. He realized then that he was the poorest man in the room. He had billions in the bank, but his currency was no longer valid. His daughter had just minted a new coin on her, and he didn't have a single cent of it. From across the room, General Holloway picked up his glass of water. He raised it toward the black screen. "To the Colonel," he said softly. "To the Colonel," the room murmured in reply. Arthur lowered his head. For the first time in 60 years, he had nothing to say. The internet is not a courtroom. It is a coliseum. There is no judge, no jury, and no appeal process. There is only the crowd. And tonight, the crowd was hungry. I did not watch the destruction of the Bracken dynasty in real time. I was buried under 60 feet of reinforced concrete, orchestrating the reboot of the Eastern Seaboard's kinetic defense grid. I was debating with engineers about load balances and encryption protocols, but while I was rebuilding the digital walls of the nation, the world outside was tearing down the walls of my father's house. Later, I would piece together the timeline of those 12 hours. I would read the logs. I would watch the clips. I would see the exact moment the tide turned from confusion to a focused, white-hot rage that incinerated the reputation my father had spent 40 years building. It started with a hashtag. By 3 a.m, hashtag Major Bracken was trending #1 globally. It was followed closely by hashtag The Real Hero and hashtag Iron Lady. People I had never met, teenagers in Seoul, truck drivers in Texas, nurses in London were sharing screenshots of my face from the broadcast. They were drawing fan art. They were digging up my old service records, finding the few public mentions of my academic awards, the ones my father had shoved into the junk drawer. But for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. As my star rose, a second hashtag began to climb the algorithm ladder, fueled by a mixture of disgust and schadenfreude. Hashtag Bracken Family Clowns. The internet is a forensic detective with unlimited resources. Within an hour of the broadcast, Julian's digital footprint had been dissected. They found the live stream, the one where he called me the Sergeant of Staplers. They found older videos, too. A clip from 2 years ago where he mocked a TSA agent for checking his bag. A deleted tweet where he complained that Veterans Day disrupted the stock market. They stitched these clips together into a montage of privilege and ignorance, set to the background audio of my voice ordering the EMP strike. The contrast was lethal. At the Aurora Pinnacle, the isolation was no longer just geographical. It was social leprosy. According to the security logs from the hotel, Arthur Bracken attempted to approach Richard Grayson in the lobby at 4:15 in the morning. Grayson was on a satellite phone, frantically trying to manage his own company's response to the crisis. "Richard," Arthur said, forcing a smile that looked like a rictus of panic. "Quite a show, isn't it, my girl Lorelei? I always knew she had it in her. We should discuss how this affects the merger. Having a hero in the family adds value to the brand. Don't you think?" Grayson lowered the phone. He looked at Arthur with eyes that were cold enough to freeze oxygen. "There is no merger." "Arthur," Grayson said. "What?" Arthur stepped back. We shook hands. "The papers are drafted." "My legal team is shredding them as we speak," Grayson replied. His voice was loud enough for the remaining staff to hear. "Do you think I can do business with you now? You are radioactive. You are a security risk. Your son is a liability. And you," he looked Arthur up and down, "you are the man who didn't know his own daughter was the shield of the Republic. If you are that blind in your own home, how can I trust you with my board?" "You can't do this," Arthur stammered. "This is a breach of contract." "Sue me," Grayson said, turning his back. "See how that plays out in front of a jury right now." Arthur stood alone in the lobby. The other guests gave him a wide berth, treating him like he was contagious. Upstairs, Julian was locked in his suite, watching his life dissolve one notification at a time. His email pinged. It was his agent. Subject contract termination. Immediate. Body Julian. In light of recent events and the viral content circulating regarding your comments on the military, Kincaid Logistics is pulling the sponsorship. The watch brand is out. The car deal is dead. Do not post anything else. Do not mention us. "They can't do this," Julian screamed, throwing his phone onto the bed. "I was joking. It was just a joke." He looked at his follower count. It was in freefall. He was losing 10,000 followers a minute, and the comments were a wall of fire. User 77. You laughed at her. She saved you. You're garbage. Air Force vet. My brother died for that uniform you made fun of. Watch your back. Julian curled into a ball on the duvet. The $50,000 a night sheets felt like sandpaper. Desperate, Arthur tried to play his last card. He tried to call me. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking, and dialed my personal number. He expected it to ring. He expected me to pick up so he could bully me, or charm me, or guilt me into issuing a statement that would absolve them. He needed me to tell the world that we were a happy family, that it was all just a misunderstanding. He pressed send. He did not get a ringtone. He did not get voicemail. Instead, a harsh, synthesized tone blasted through the speaker, followed by a recorded voice that was devoid of humanity. The number you have dialed is restricted under National Security Protocol. Theta 9. Your attempt to contact this asset has been logged by the Department of Defense. Cease communication immediately. Arthur stared at the phone. The screen flashed red, then went black. She blocked me, he whispered to Evelyn, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. My own daughter blocked me. She didn't block you, Arthur, Evelyn said softly. Her voice sounded distant, broken. The United States government blocked you. You are not just a bad father anymore. You are a threat. By sunrise, the press had arrived. They came in helicopters, landing on the private pads usually reserved for billionaires. They came in news vans, swarming the access roads at the base of the mountain. CNN, Fox, BBC, Al Jazeera. They were all there. The story was too good to resist the secret savior of the nation and the family who despised her. Arthur saw the cameras from the balcony. A flicker of his old arrogance returned. He fixed his tie. He smoothed his hair. He thought he could handle this. He thought he could spin it. He walked out onto the front steps of the resort, flanked by a terrified Julian. Evelyn refused to leave the room. The microphones were thrust into his face. The flashes were blinding. Mr. Bracken, a reporter from the Times shouted. Did you know about your daughter's role? How do you feel about her receiving the Medal of Freedom? Arthur put on his boardroom face. He smiled. A practiced, oily expression. We are incredibly proud. Arthur lied. He spoke smoothly, projecting confidence. Lorelei has always been special. We raised her to be tough. We raised her to serve. You know, that steel she showed last night. She got that from me. The Bracken discipline. We have always supported her choices, even when they required secrecy. He placed a hand on Julian's shoulder. My son and I were just joking earlier, a family inside joke. We knew she was watching over us. We have full confidence in her. It was a good performance. For a moment, the reporter seemed to pause, scribbling down his quotes. Then, the doors behind him opened. General Marcus Holloway stepped out. He was wearing his coat, carrying a duffel bag. He looked like a mountain that had decided to walk. He stopped next to Arthur. He looked at the cameras. He looked at Arthur. That is a lie, Holloway rumbled. The reporters went silent. The cameras zoomed in. General, a reporter asked, what is a lie? Everything this man just said, Holloway stated. He didn't look at Arthur. He looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera. I was in the room last night. I was in the room when he laughed at her. I was in the room when he called her a secretary. I was in the room when he told his friends that she was a failure because she didn't make enough money. Arthur turned pale. General, please, let's not. He didn't know, Holloway continued, drowning him out. He had no idea who she was. And when she saved his life, his first reaction wasn't gratitude. It was to complain about the room service. Holloway turned to Arthur. You didn't raise a hero, Bracken. You survived one. The press pack erupted. The questions changed instantly. They became sharks sensing blood in the water. Mr. Bracken, is it true you mocked her rank? Julian, Did you really call her a stapler sergeant? Why did you lie about supporting her? Arthur backed away, shielding his face. Julian tried to run back inside, but the door was locked. The hotel manager had secured the perimeter. They were trapped on the steps, bathed in the flashing lights of their own public execution. But the final blow did not come from the resort. It came from New York. At 10 in the morning, a user named Pierre Staff01 uploaded a video to Twitter. It was security footage from the Obsidian Room restaurant, time-stamped from the previous evening. The angle was high, but the image was clear. It showed a woman in a dress blue uniform standing at a table. It showed a man in a tuxedo standing over her. It showed the man reaching into his pocket. And then, it showed the money. The internet watched in slow motion as Arthur Bracken threw a handful of $100 bills at a United States Air Force officer. They watched the bills flutter down, landing in the butter dish, landing on her uniform. They watched the woman, the same woman they had seen commanding generals a few hours later, stand there with dignity, folding her napkin, refusing to break. The caption on the video was simple. "This is how Arthur Bracken treats the woman who saved the world. He threw money at her like she was a stripper. I was the waiter. I saw it all." That was the match that burned the forest down. The outrage was nuclear. Within 10 minutes, the stock price of Bracken Global Logistics plummeted. It dropped 20%, then 30%, then 50%. Trading was halted by the SEC due to volatility. But the damage was done. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. They didn't invite Arthur. They voted to remove him as CEO in absentia, citing gross reputational damage and conduct unbecoming. Arthur's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was the notification from his broker. Alert. BGL stock down 60%. Margin call imminent. He looked at the screen. He looked at the reporters screaming questions he couldn't answer. He looked at Julian, who was weeping openly on the steps. He had lost the money. He had lost the company. He had lost the respect. And where was I? I was 4,000 miles away from the drama. I was sitting in the briefing room of the NOC, drinking lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup. I was reviewing the damage assessment reports for the Western Grid. I was coordinating with FEMA to get generators to hospitals in Seattle. I didn't know about the hashtags. I didn't know about the stock crash. I didn't know about Holloway's speech or the leaked video. I was too busy doing the job they said wasn't real. A young lieutenant walked in. "Colonel, your phone is lighting up. Like, a lot. Do you want to check it?" I looked at my personal phone, sitting face down on the table. It was vibrating so hard it was slowly moving across the surface. "No," I said. I picked it up and held the power button until the screen went black. "If it is important, they will call the red line." "But ma'am," the lieutenant hesitated, "it is all over the news. Your family, the resort." I looked up at him. My eyes were tired, but they were peaceful. "Lieutenant," I said, "I have a power grid to stabilize. I have a satellite constellation to rebuild. I do not have time for reality television." I turned back to the map. "Let them talk," I said. "We have work to do." That was my revenge. Not a scream, not a lawsuit, not a public statement. My revenge was that while their world was collapsing under the weight of their own vanity, I was too busy holding up the sky to notice. I simply existed. I existed in my competence, in my purpose, in my truth. And that existence, bright and undeniable, cast a shadow so long that it swallowed them whole. The silence of the Adirondacks was different from the silence of the glass cage. It was not the heavy, pressurized quiet of held breath and encrypted data. It was organic. It was the sound of wind moving through pine needles and water lapping against a wooden dock. 48 hours after I ordered the detonation that blinded half the continent, I sat on the porch of a cabin that did not exist on any deed Arthur Bracken could find. I had bought it 3 years ago through a shell corporation. It was my sanctuary. My parents thought I spent my leave days in a cramped apartment in Queens, eating instant noodles. They did not know about the lake. They did not know about the kayak tied to the jetty or the shelf of first editions inside by the stone fireplace. I held a mug of black coffee in my hands, watching the steam rise into the cold morning air. For 2 days, I had not spoken a word. I had slept for 14 hours straight, a sleep so deep it felt like a coma. When I woke up, the adrenaline crash was gone, replaced by a strange, hollow clarity. My phone sat on the railing of the porch. It was not my secure military device. That was locked in a safe inside. This was my personal phone, the one Arthur had tried to call, the one I had turned off the moment the broadcast ended. I reached out and held the power button. The screen lit up. The Apple logo appeared, innocent and white. Then, the avalanche began. The phone vibrated violently, dancing across the wooden railing. It buzzed for a solid 3 minutes as the network dumped 2 days' worth of desperation into the notification bar. I watched the numbers climb. 100 missed calls, 200, 300. It stopped at 512. There were 4,000 text messages. I did not feel anxiety. I felt like an archaeologist brushing dirt off a ruin, studying the artifacts of a dead civilization. I opened the messages. The first block was from Julian. They started immediately after the broadcast. Julian. 4:02 a.m. Lori. Is that you? OMG, Julian 4:15 a.m. Pickup. Dad is freaking out. Julian 5:30 a.m. The internet is killing me. You have to tell them I was joking. Please, Lori, I will do anything. Julian. 10 o'clock a.m. I lost the Kincaid deal. They fired me. Fix this, Julian. Yesterday. Why do you hate us? I scrolled past them. Panic, bargaining, accusation. The stages of grief for a life he hadn't earned. Then came Evelyn. Mom, 6 a.m. We didn't know. Mom, 8 a.m. Your father is devastated. He loves you so much. We just want to see you. Mom, yesterday, please call. The reporters are outside. We can't leave the room. And finally, Arthur. I clicked on his thread. There were fewer messages, but they were heavier. Dad. 9 o'clock a.m. Lorelei, call me immediately. We need to coordinate a press release. Dad. 2 o'clock p.m. I always knew you had greatness in you. That is why I was so hard on you, to push you. You understand that. Right, Dad? Yesterday, come home. We will throw a celebration, a real party. Just for you. We can fix this. We are a team. I lowered the phone. A laugh bubbled up in my chest, dry and sharp. I always knew. It was the lie of the century. He had looked at me across a dinner table 2 nights ago and told me I was a failure. He had thrown money at me to make me disappear. And now, because the world had decided I was valuable, he was rewriting history to make himself the architect of my success. He wanted to throw a party, not to honor me, but to stand next to me in the photos, to absorb the shine of the medal so he wouldn't look so dull. I didn't reply. I didn't feel the need to argue. That was the surprise. For 30 years, I had rehearsed the arguments I would have with him, the shouting matches where I would finally make him see me. But now that I had the ammunition, I didn't want to fire the gun. I just wanted to unload it and walk away. I went inside and turned on the television. I needed to see the battlefield from the civilian perspective. The news was a continuous loop of the cyber crisis, but the segment that caught my eye was a replay from late last night. The headline read, "The Fall of the House of Bracken." The footage showed the entrance of the Aurora Pinnacle, but it wasn't the glamorous establishing shot from the brochures. It showed security guards, large men in black coats escorting a group of 3 people out the side door. It was my family. They were not leaving in a limousine. They were standing by a pile of Louis Vuitton luggage on the snowy pavement, looking lost. The voiceover reporter was ruthless. Sources at the resort confirmed that management asked the Bracken family to vacate the premises yesterday afternoon, the reporter said. Other high-profile guests reportedly threatened to check out if Arthur Bracken remained on the property. The man who once commanded respect on Wall Street was effectively evicted for being a public nuisance. The camera zoomed in on Arthur. He was shouting at a bellboy, pointing at his bags, but there was no power in his gestures. He looked small. He looked like an old man yelling at the weather. The scene cut to New York City, Park Avenue. The sidewalk in front of my parents' building was a zoo. Satellite trucks were double parked for 3 blocks. A crowd of protesters stood behind police barricades holding signs. "Thank you, Colonel Bracken. Shame on Arthur real heroes. Don't wear tuxedos." I watched as a black town car tried to push through the crowd. It was my parents returning from the airport. The mob surged forward. Eggs brown and white flew through the air, splattering against the tinted windows. The car disappeared into the garage. The news anchor shook his head. A humiliating homecoming for the family of the hour, but Arthur Bracken is not going down without a fight. In an exclusive interview taped earlier this morning, he tried to set the record straight. The screen shifted to a talk show set. Arthur was sitting opposite a famous investigative journalist known for her razor-sharp interviews. Arthur looked polished. He had showered, shaved, and put on a fresh suit. He was trying to channel the titan of industry. "It is a misunderstanding," Arthur said to the host, leaning forward with a practiced sincerity. "Lorelei and I have a complex relationship, but it is built on love. The video of the money that was an allowance. I was giving her money for her vacation because I know government salaries are low. I was trying to help her." The host didn't blink. She reached under her desk and pulled out a tablet. "Mr. Bracken," she said coolly, "we have the audio from the restaurant security system. The waiter released it an hour ago." Arthur froze. The host pressed play. My father's voice, tinny but unmistakable, filled the studio. "Take it. Go buy yourself a new uniform. Or go to a bar and buy a round of drinks for your little soldier friends and tell them how mean your daddy is." The audience in the studio gasped. Arthur's face on the screen went from confident to corpse white in a single second. He stammered. He tried to speak, but the lie had been decapitated on live television. "That is," Arthur choked. "That was context. You were mocking the uniform she wore to save your life," the host said. She closed the folder on her desk. "We are done here, Mr. Bracken." I turned off the TV. I sat in the silence of the cabin. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt a rush of triumph seeing him reduced to stuttering wreckage. But I didn't. I felt a profound, aching sadness. Not for myself, but for him. He had spent his whole life building a monument to himself, and he had built it on sand. A sound from the driveway broke my reverie, tires crunching on gravel. I stood up, my hand instinctively going to the small pistol I kept in the bookshelf. I moved to the window. It was not the press. It was a black SUV with government plates. 2 men in dark suits got out. I recognized the lead agent. It was Peterson, from the Secret Service. I opened the door before they knocked. "Colonel," Peterson said, nodding respectfully, "we apologize for the intrusion. We were instructed to deliver this by hand. Eyes only." He handed me a thick envelope. It was heavy, cream-colored stock with the seal of the White House embossed in gold on the flap. "Thank you, Agent," I said. They didn't linger. They got back in the car and drove away, leaving me alone with the paper that would define the rest of my life. I went back to the porch and sat down. I opened the envelope. There was a handwritten note from the president, thanking me for my service, but underneath that was a formal document from the Department of Defense. It was a job offer. Subject transfer of command to Pentagon Joint Chiefs Staff. Cyber Warfare Division. Rank, Brigadier General Select. Clearance Yankee White. It was the pinnacle of my career. It was a position that would put me in the room where history was written, but my eyes were drawn to the final paragraph. Highlighted in bold. Condition of appointment. Due to the high-profile nature of the recent breach and the compromised public status of your immediate family, the candidate must agree to a permanent security separation from the following individuals: Arthur Bracken, Evelyn Bracken, Julian Bracken. Any contact with these individuals constitutes a potential intelligence vulnerability and grounds for revocation of clearance. I stared at the words. Permanent security separation. The government was formalizing what I had felt in my heart for years. They were telling me that to ascend, I had to cut the ballast. They were offering me the world. But the price of admission was to become an orphan. I put the letter down on the table. I reached into my wallet. Tucked behind my military ID and my credit card was a small, folded photograph. It was old, the edges soft and worn. It was taken 20 years ago. We were on a boat in the Hamptons. Julian was 15, holding a fishing rod. I was 12, squinting into the sun. Arthur had his hand on my shoulder. Evelyn was smiling. It looked like a happy family. I remembered that day. I remembered that Arthur had yelled at me 5 minutes before the photo was taken because I had dropped a sandwich on the deck. He had called me clumsy and useless. Then, when the camera came out, he had put his hand on my shoulder and smiled. It was a lie then. It was a lie now. I stood up and walked to the fireplace. The embers from the morning fire were still glowing orange in the ash. I looked at the photo one last time. I looked at the 12-year-old girl who just wanted her father to be proud of her. "You don't need him," I whispered to the girl in the picture. "You never did." I tossed the photo onto the embers. It didn't burn instantly. The edges curled first, turning brown. Then the image of Julian's face bubbled and melted. Then Evelyn, finally. The flame caught the center, and the smiling face of Arthur Bracken turned into black smoke and drifted up the chimney. I watched until there was nothing left but gray ash. I picked up my phone. I ignored the texts. I dialed a number I had memorized but never used. It was the number for the family's longtime lawyer, a man who feared Arthur but respected power. He answered on the first ring. "Ms. Bracken?" he asked, his voice nervous. Or should I say Colonel? "Lorelei is fine, Mr. Henderson," I said. My voice was steady. "I need you to set up a meeting." "Of course," Henderson said quickly. "Your father has been desperate to speak with you. He wants to meet at the penthouse. He wants to apologize." "No," I said. "Not the penthouse, neutral ground, and no press. If I see one camera, I walk, and I take my testimony to the Senate Intelligence Committee." "Understood," Henderson said. "Where do you want to meet?" "There is a conference room at the firm," I said. "Tomorrow at noon. Tell them to be there. Tell them this is the only chance they will get." "I will tell them," Henderson said. "Lorelei, are you going to help them?" I looked at the White House letter on the table. I looked at the ash in the fireplace. "I am going to finish it," I said. I hung up. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the water in shades of violet and gold. It was the same color as the ionization trail of the weapon I had fired into the sky. I sat there as the darkness gathered around the cabin. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the lights to come on. I wasn't waiting for permission. I was the darkness, and I was the light, and I was finally, completely free. Tomorrow, I would walk into a room with the people who made me, and I would leave as the woman who survived them. The conference room at Henderson and Vane was designed to intimidate. It was a glass box suspended 40 floors above Midtown Manhattan, offering a view of the skyline that usually made clients feel like gods. Today, however, the room felt less like Olympus and more like an interrogation cell. I arrived 15 minutes early. I did not sit at the head of the table. I stood by the window, looking down at the ant-sized traffic on the streets below. "Colonel," Sergeant Miller said. He was standing by the door, his hands clasped loosely in front of his tactical vest. He was one of 2 armed military police officers assigned to my detail. "They are in the elevator. ETA 1 minute." "Thank you, Sergeant," I said. "Remember the rules of engagement. No physical contact unless they initiate. If they raise their voices, you step forward. If they move toward me, you stop them." "Understood, ma'am." I turned away from the window and checked my reflection in the glass partition. I was not wearing my uniform. That would have been too easy. It would have given them a symbol to focus on, something to respect or resent. Instead, I wore a charcoal gray suit, tailored from Italian wool, a silk blouse the color of ice, and heels that clicked with the authority of a gavel. I had bought the outfit yesterday with my own money, the kind of money they thought I didn't have. I looked like a CEO. I looked like the person Arthur Bracken had pretended to be for 40 years. The elevator doors chimed. My family walked in. The transformation was shocking. It had only been 3 days since the broadcast, but they looked as if they had aged a decade. Arthur Bracken, the Lion of Wall Street, walked with a stoop. His suit, usually pressed to razor sharpness, looked slept in. His tie was slightly askew. Evelyn walked a step behind him, clutching her Hermes bag like a shield. Her eyes were swollen, red-rimmed behind dark sunglasses she removed as she entered. She looked fragile, as if a strong wind would shatter her into dust. And Julian, my brother, looked like a ghost. He was unshaven, wearing a hoodie under a blazer, his eyes darting around the room with the paranoid energy of an addict looking for a fix. They stopped when they saw the guards. Arthur stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he took in the uniforms and the sidearms. Then he saw me. "Lorelei," Arthur said. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried to summon the old boom, the voice that commanded boardrooms. "Lorelei, thank God." He moved toward me, opening his arms for a hug. It was a clumsy, desperate gesture, a performance of fatherly affection designed for an audience of one. "Stop," Sergeant Miller barked. He didn't shout, but the command was absolute. Miller stepped in front of Arthur, his hand raised flat against the air, creating a wall between us. Arthur recoiled as if he had been burned. "What is this? She is my daughter. I want to hug my daughter." "Please take a seat. Mr. Bracken," I said. My voice was calm, modulated, the same voice I used to order satellite realignments. "The sergeant is doing his job. Maintain distance." Arthur looked at me over the sergeant's shoulder. He looked hurt. He looked confused. "Lori, it is me. Dad, why are there armed guards?" "Sit down," I repeated. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat. I did not gesture for them to join me. They hesitated, then shuffled to the chairs on the opposite side. Forming a ragged line of defendants, "We have been trying to reach you for 48 hours, Arthur began, leaning forward, his hands clasping and unclasping on the mahogany table. "The house is a siege. The press won't leave. The phone won't stop ringing with cancellations. Lorelei, it is a nightmare." "I know," I said. "I read the reports." "The reports," Julian piped up. His voice was whine. "Lori, they are destroying me online. I lost the verified checkmark. I lost the sponsors. Even the gym canceled my membership. You have to fix this. Just put out a tweet. Tell them we were joking. Tell them I am a good guy." I looked at Julian. I really looked at him. For years, I had seen him as a rival, a golden idol I could never outshine. Now, I saw him for what he was, a 35-year-old child who had never packed his own lunch. "I cannot do that, Julian," I said. "Why not?" he pleaded. "You are the hero. They listen to you. Just say I helped you. Say I was keeping your cover. Anything." "I cannot do that," I said, "because it would be a lie, and I am done with lies." "It is a misunderstanding." Evelyn burst out. She reached across the table, her hand trembling. "Lorelei, we didn't know. If we had known you were important, we would never have treated you that way." I let the silence hang in the room for a long time. I let the weight of her words settle on them like dust. "If I were important," I repeated slowly, "that is the problem. Mother, I was always important. I was your daughter. That should have been enough." Evelyn flinched and pulled her hand back. "We are not here to discuss parenting strategies," I said, cutting off Arthur before he could launch into a defense. "We are here to discuss national security." I reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out 3 thick files. I slid them across the polished table. They hit the wood with a heavy, dull thud. One for Arthur, one for Evelyn, one for Julian. The covers were stamped with red ink, Department of Defense, Threat Assessment, Classified. Arthur stared at the file in front of him. "What is this?" "That is your life," I said. "Or rather, the liability your life poses to the United States government." Arthur opened the folder. His eyes widened as he scanned the first page. This This is my bank account, he whispered. These are my emails, my medical records. How do you have this? When the president offered me the position of brigadier general, I lied smoothly. The rank was select, not confirmed, but they didn't know the difference. I had to undergo a Yankee White background check. That check extends to immediate family. Do you know what they found? I looked at Julian. They found a gambling debt of $200,000 to a syndicate in Macau. That makes you a leveraged target for foreign intelligence. Julian turned pale. I was going to pay it back. I looked at Arthur. They found that your company, Bracken Global Logistics, has been cutting corners on safety compliance for 3 years to inflate the stock price. You are vulnerable to blackmail. Arthur slammed the folder shut. That is business. Everyone does it. Not everyone has a daughter with the nuclear launch codes, I said coldly. I leaned back in my chair. Here's the reality. You 3 are no longer just a public embarrassment. You are a security hole. Ignorance and greed are vulnerabilities. And foreign actors exploit vulnerabilities. As long as I hold my clearance, I cannot have loose ends, and you are the loosest ends I have. So what are you saying? Arthur asked, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. You are going to arrest us. No, I said. I am going to sanitize the asset. I pulled a second document from my portfolio, a legal contract. Bracken Global Logistics is in free fall, I said. The stock is trading at $12 a share. It was $80 last week. The board is preparing to file for bankruptcy protection to salvage the assets. If that happens, you lose everything. The penthouse, the Hamptons house, the cars. You will be destitute. Arthur looked like he was about to vomit. I built that company. It is my name on the door. And your name is toxic, I said. No one will do business with a Bracken right now, except one person. I tapped the contract. I have arranged a private equity buyout, I said. I am offering to purchase 51% of the controlling shares of Bracken Global Logistics. I will inject enough capital to stabilize the stock and prevent bankruptcy. Arthur's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. You are going to save the company. You have that kind of money. I have the backers, I said, but there are conditions. What conditions? Arthur asked suspiciously. Condition 1, I said. You retire immediately. You step down as chairman and CEO. You surrender your seat on the board. You will sign a non-compete clause that bans you from the logistics industry for life. You will take your pension, and you will go away. You can't do that, Arthur shouted, standing up. Sergeant Miller took a step forward, his hand dropping to his belt. Arthur sat back down quickly. I am the founder. You are stealing my company. I am saving your legacy from the auction block. I corrected him. You have a choice, Dad. You can be the retired founder who stepped down for health reasons, or you can be the bankrupt pariah who lost everything. Choose. Arthur slumped in his chair. He looked at the contract. He looked at the guards. He looked at me. He saw no hesitation in my eyes. He saw the same steel he had praised on television, only now it was pointed at his throat. And Julian, Evelyn asked softly, what about Julian? I turned to my brother. He was chewing his fingernails. Julian is a different problem, I said. He has no skills, he has no job, and he has a very loud mouth. I slid a separate document toward Julian. This is a plea deal, I said. Not with the court, but with me. A plea deal, Julian asked. You have 4 pending lawsuits for defamation and breach of contract from your sponsors, I said. I can make those go away. I have leverage with Kincaid and the others, but in exchange, you are going to work. I can work, Julian said eagerly. I can be your VP. I can handle PR for the new company. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that startled them. No, Julian, I said. You are going to do community service, real service. I have spoken to the director of the Veterans Housing Initiative in the Bronx. They need manual labor, renovation, cleaning, trash removal. Manual labor. Julian looked horrified. Like a janitor. Like a soldier, I said. You are going to work 40 hours a week for 1 year. You are going to wear a uniform, a gray jumpsuit. You are going to scrub floors and paint walls for men and women who actually serve this country. And you are going to post about it every single day. Not to complain, but to apologize. You are going to rehabilitate your image by actually doing something useful for the first time in your life. I won't do it, Julian spat. That is slavery. I am a Bracken. Then you can deal with the lawsuits alone, I said simply. And when the Macau syndicate comes for their $200,000, do not give them my number. Julian looked at his mother. Evelyn looked away. She knew I was right. She knew this was the only lifeboat left in the ocean. 1 year, Julian whispered, and then we will see if you have grown up, I said. I looked back at Arthur. He was holding a pen. His hand was shaking so badly the tip was vibrating against the paper. You are enjoying this, Arthur hissed. You are enjoying humiliating me. No, Dad, I said. I am not enjoying it. I am fixing it. That is what I do. I fix systems that are broken, and this family is broken. I gave you everything, Arthur muttered, staring at the paper. I gave you a home. I gave you a name. You gave me a roof, I said. I made the home inside myself, and as for the name, I am making it mean something again. You should be thanking me. Thank you, Arthur said, the words dripping with venom. Thank you for stealing my life. Sign the paper, Arthur, Evelyn said. Her voice was surprisingly strong. We all looked at her. Sign it, she said, staring at the table. She won. She beat us. Just sign it so we can go home. Arthur let out a long, shuddering breath. He looked at me one last time. He was searching for the little girl who used to cry when he raised his voice. He didn't find her. He found a brigadier general who had stared down nuclear war. He pressed the pen to the paper. He signed his name. It was a messy scrawl. A surrender treaty signed in ink. Julian, I said. Julian grabbed the pen and signed his document quickly, as if afraid I would change my mind and send him to prison instead. I took the folders back. I checked the signatures. Everything was in order. Good, I said. I stood up. They stayed seated. They looked smaller than ever. The buyout funds will be transferred to your escrow account by the end of the business day, I said. The press release announcing your retirement goes out in 1 hour. I suggest you stay off the internet for a while. I turned to leave. Lorelei, Arthur called out. I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. I didn't turn around. Are you happy? He asked. You have the medal. You have the company. You have the power. Are you happy? I looked at the view of the city through the glass walls. I saw the grid of streets I had protected. I saw the millions of lights that were still burning because I had done my job. I am effective, I said. In my line of work, that is better than happy. I opened the door and walked out. Sergeant Miller followed me, closing the door on the room, sealing them inside the glass cage of their own making. I walked down the hallway, the click of my heels echoing on the marble. I didn't look back. I had a meeting at the Pentagon in 4 hours. I had a new office to set up. I had a world to watch. The Brackens were yesterday's problem. I was tomorrow's solution. Washington, D.C., is a city built on the architecture of power, the white marble of the monuments, the imposing domes of the Capitol, the rigid grid of the streets. It all screams authority. But from the balcony of my new office on the 5th ring of the Pentagon, the city looked different. It looked fragile. It has been 6 months since the blackout. 6 months since the sky turned purple and the world almost ended. 6 months since I sat in a glass cage and deleted my family from my life. The air here is humid, heavy with the scent of the Potomac River and the exhaust of 1,000 motorcades. It is a stark contrast to the sterile, recycled air of the bunker or the crisp, pine-scented air of the Adirondacks where I made my final decision. But I like it. It smells like work. I leaned against the railing, looking down at the parking lot where the black SUVs were lining up for the morning briefing. I held a tumbler of sparkling water in my hand. No alcohol. I needed my edges sharp. My life has bifurcated into 2 distinct timelines before the broadcast and after. In the after, Things have changed. Bracken Global Logistics still exists, but in name only. The sign on the skyscraper in Manhattan remains. But the boardroom where Arthur Bracken once held court is now occupied by a board of trustees appointed by me. I transferred the controlling interest of the company into a blind trust, the Iron Dome Initiative. Every cent of profit the company generates, every dividend that used to pay for Julian's sports cars and Evelyn's spa treatments, is now funneled directly into veteran support services. We fund cybersecurity training for wounded warriors. We pay for advanced prosthetics. We cover mental health treatment for operators who have seen too much. Arthur Bracken is inadvertently becoming the greatest philanthropist in the history of veteran affairs. The irony is not lost on me. In fact, it is the sweetest part of the deal. He is funding the very people he called servants. I have reports on my desk about my parents. I do not read them often, but I keep tabs. It is a security precaution. I tell myself, they live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Chelsea now. It is a nice neighborhood, respectable, but it is not the penthouse. There is no doorman to carry their bags. There is no private elevator. They are pariahs in the social circles they used to dominate. The Graysons, the board members, the gala organizers, they all dropped the Brackens the moment the ink was dry on my resignation from the family. My field agents tell me that Arthur spends his days sitting in the park, feeding pigeons, wearing a suit that is starting to fray at the cuffs. He tells anyone who will listen that his daughter is a general, that he taught her everything she knows. Most people just walk past him. They know who he is. He is the man from the video, the man who threw money at a hero. Evelyn is quieter. She volunteers at a library, shelving books. I think, in a way, she prefers the silence. She doesn't have to pretend to be happy anymore. She doesn't have to host dinners for people she hates. She just exists in the small, quiet space that is left after the ambition burns out. And Julian, my brother, is halfway through his sentence at the Bronx Veterans Housing Initiative. He is not painting walls anymore. He has been promoted to the recycling center. I pulled up the live feed from the facility on my tablet. It is open source, part of the transparency agreement I forced him to sign. There he was, Julian Bracken, wearing a bright orange safety vest over a gray jumpsuit. He was standing at a conveyor belt, sorting plastic bottles from aluminum cans. He looked thinner. His hair, once styled with $50 gel, was matted under a hard hat. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't talking to a camera. He was just working. For the first time in 35 years, his hands were dirty. I watched him for a minute. He paused to wipe sweat from his forehead, and for a second, he looked at the security camera. There was no defiance in his eyes. There was no arrogance, just exhaustion. He looked like a man who finally understood the weight of a dollar. He hasn't posted on social media in 6 months. The hashtag #BrackenClown has faded, replaced by the next internet scandal. But Julian has not returned to the digital world. He is learning to live in the real one. General. I turned. Mercer was standing in the doorway of the balcony. He wasn't Captain Mercer anymore. He was Lieutenant Colonel Mercer. The promotion had come through last week. He wore the rank well. His uniform was crisp. His face rested and confident. "The team is assembled, ma'am," Mercer said. "General Vance is waiting." "Thank you, Mercer," I said. "I will be right there." Mercer stepped out onto the balcony. He stood beside me, looking out at the city. "Big day," he said. "Just another Tuesday," I replied, though we both knew that was a lie. "My wife sent you a cake," Mercer said, smiling. "She baked it herself. It is chocolate. She said if you don't eat it, she's going to write a letter to the president complaining about your diet." I laughed. It felt good to laugh. It felt real. "Tell her I accept the mission," I said. This was my family. Mercer, who had stayed at his post while the world burned. Vance, who had taken a piece of shrapnel for me. The operators in the pit who had trusted me when the screens went black. We didn't share blood. We shared something thicker. We shared the line. We shared the knowledge that when the lights go out, we are the ones who hold the torch. My personal phone buzzed in my pocket. I hesitated. Very few people had this number. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a text message. The name at the top was Mom. I stared at the timestamp. It was exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. I had been born at 10 o'clock in the morning, 33 years ago. Happy birthday. Lorelei, I made your favorite lemon bars today. I know you can't eat them. I just wanted to make them. I hope you are safe. We miss you. I looked at the words. 6 months ago, a message like this would have torn me apart. I would have analyzed every syllable. We miss you. Did they miss me? Or did they miss the access? Did they miss the validation? I would have felt guilty. I would have felt angry. I would have felt the old, familiar tug of the drawer where they used to hide my accomplishments. But standing there, in the sunlight of Washington, D.C., with a lieutenant colonel at my side and a new mission waiting in the war room, I felt nothing. It wasn't a cold nothing. It wasn't hatred. It was the absence of weight. It was the feeling of setting down a heavy rucksack after a 100-mile march and realizing you never have to pick it up again. They were strangers. They were people I used to know. People who shared a history with me, but not a future. Their regret was real. I was sure of that. But it was their regret, not mine. I did not have to carry it for them. I didn't type a reply. I didn't save the message. I swiped left. Delete conversation. This action cannot be undone. I pressed delete. The message vanished. The screen went back to my wallpaper, a high-resolution image of the Earth taken from the Sentinel satellite before I detonated it. A blue marble in the dark, fragile and beautiful. "Everything okay, General?" Mercer asked. I slid the phone back into my pocket. "Everything is perfect," I said. "Let's go. We have work to do." We walked back inside, leaving the humidity of the city for the cool, air-conditioned sanctity of the hallway. We walked past the portraits of past generals, past the flags of the military branches. We reached the double doors of the briefing room A. 2 Marines in dress blues snapped to attention as we approached. One of them opened the door. I stepped inside. The room was full. 30 of the highest-ranking military and intelligence officers in the Western Hemisphere were seated around the massive oval table. There were admirals, generals, directors of the CIA and NSA. At the head of the table, a screen was displaying the mission parameters. Operation Silent Vanguard, Classified Cosmic Top Secret, Objective Orbital Defense Platform, Phase 2. This was not just about fixing the grid anymore. This was about building a new one, a defense system that extended beyond the atmosphere, a shield that would ensure no one state actor or terrorist cell could ever hold the world hostage again, and I was going to lead it. As I crossed the threshold, the room went silent. Then, one by one, the chairs scraped back. General Vance stood up. The director of the CIA stood up. The admiral stood up. They turned toward me. They didn't look at me with pity. They didn't look at me with doubt. They looked at me with expectation. I walked to the head of the table. I placed my tablet on the surface. I looked around the room, meeting their eyes. These were the masters of war, the architects of geopolitics, and they were waiting for my command. I thought about Arthur Bracken one last time. I remembered the smell of his cologne. I remembered the way he used to look at me across the dinner table, his eyes full of disappointment. I remembered the specific cadence of his voice when he said the words that had driven me for 20 years. "Mày chả làm được tích sự gì. You are useless." He had said it so many times. You are support. You are a clerk. You are nothing. I smiled. It was a small, private smile. He was right. I hadn't done anything for them. I hadn't made them rich. I hadn't made them famous. I hadn't been the trophy daughter they wanted to show off at the country club. I had failed to be the accessory to their vanity. I had been too busy. I had been too busy building the walls that kept them safe while they slept. I had been too busy standing in the rain so they could stay dry. I had been too busy saving their world so they could have the luxury of living in it to regret losing me. And that was enough. I cleared my throat. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "Gentlemen, ladies," I said, my voice steady, the voice of the colonel, the general, the daughter who walked away. "Please be seated. The timeline is tight, and the sky is waiting. I tap the screen. The holographic map of the solar system lit up the center of the table, bathing us all in the light of a million stars. I didn't look back at the door. I looked up. The mission was a go. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey through betrayal, redemption, and the quiet power of standing your ground. If you are listening to this, I want to know where you are in the world right now. Are you listening from a break room in London, a commute in New York, or a quiet room in Tokyo? Leave a comment below and share your location and your thoughts on Lorelei's choice. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of justice served cold, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Family Revenge Stories. Hit that like button to help us grow, and don't forget to press the hype button so this story can reach even more people who need to hear it. Let's keep the stories coming. Stay safe, and remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply thriving.